welcome to Once Upon a Town, the show where we delve deep into Franklin history. I'm Eamon McCarthy-Earls.
And I'm Joe Landry.
So Joe, what will we be talking about today?
Today, we're going to have some fun. We're going to talk about the Franklin 500. So you're probably wondering, what the heck is the Franklin 500? Well, believe it or not, this expression is actually recognized in the Urban Dictionary. It's that 2.3 mile loop in Franklin. It was popular, made popular in the 90s. In high school, by high school students, they wanted to meet up and find, their different friends where everyone could get drunk. I did the Franklin 500, but I didn't do that for that reason. Back in the 60s, when I got my license, it was a lot of, the big thing was to just ride around town. And inevitably, the route that we took was you'd be coming down East Central Street, you'd get to the center of town, and then you take a right at the bridge, go to Emmons Street, you take a left at Emmons Street, come to the end, come to West Central Street, and then you would take a left and you would head back down towards 140, back to where you started. So that was the route that we took. And that's basically where the racetrack was, the racetrack for the Franklin 500. Now, where was the starting line or the finish line? Well, there really was no starting line or finish line. But I think it's fairly safe to say that if there were a starting line, it would probably be there. Lola's Dairy. That was the place to go back in the 50s, 60s, and even into the 70s. Today, that's where the Big Y store is located down on East Central Street.
And I know that location over on East Central Street has had kind of a complicated history since presumably the days of Lola's Dairy.
Oh, absolutely.
I know the urban legend back in the early 2000s was that it was a cursed spot or owned by organized crime or something like that, because there kept being a succession of Chinese restaurants in there that all failed. But wow. I guess it's a storied location.
It is. There was the one thing about Lola's Dairy. I was always sad when you saw the sign in the window that said "Closed for the season. See you in April," because they closed down for the winter. But it was a great place to go. So. But now, we weren't limited to just that route as far as when we got to Emmons Street and when you get to the center of town. Sometimes people would drive down towards the Catholic Church, and they would turn around there and head back into town. So the racetrack was really not limited to just that particular route. Sometimes we'd do that for a little change of pace. This is back in the day, by the way, before they extended the Common. There used to be a huge parking lot right in front of the church, and they used to have parking there for Mass. They could literally line up 3 rows of cars right there in front of the church. But
that's the spot that became the War Memorial.
Exactly.
Currently, it's in place of that old parking lot.
Right. I'm not sure if it was around the 80s or the 90s that they extended the Common and they added that. But a lot of people remember when they used to park there. Now, sometimes for a change of pace, we would, instead of going back to town in front of the St. Mary's School, we would go around the parking lot and then we'd go down Union Street till we get to West Central Street, and then we would take a left and head back towards town that way. And head back down to Lola's Dairy, turn around, and do it again. Now, once in a while, as you enter Main Street and you get to Emmons Street, instead of turning left on Emmons Street, you would turn, and the little turnaround that was right in front of Dean College, Dean Academy at that time. And what you would do is you would bang a Yui. There's a little expression for you. You'd bang a Yui and go back in the opposite direction. And this spot was actually recognized as a legal turnaround spot. It wasn't like we were breaking any rules or any laws, but it was a recognized turnaround spot. Yep. And sometimes we would whip a Yui. That's another one we would use. And on Summer Street and head back toward the bridge. I've did that a few times, but a little change of pace. So now, when we were leaving Lola's Dairy, if you had a high-performance car, you didn't just drive up to, you would show off to all your friends, and you would go through the gears. Going through the gears was something that, if you had like a sports car, typically had a 4-speed, 4 on the floor, as they would call it. And you would start, and you would probably even burn rubber as you leave. And if you were smart enough, you could pop the clutch and get rubber in all 4 gears. And you could hear them chirping up. So it was really, really something to see. Really, the best spot was right under the tree. As soon as you pull into Lola's, there was a big tree there. And that was the best spot because you could just stand there on a hot summer's night, and watch these cars just pull in, pull out. No, it was great, just like American Graffiti. It's really something. So now sometimes cars didn't have a 4-speed. They had a 3-speed. Because back in those days, cars were not all automatic. Some of them a lot of them were standard shift, and some of them had 3-speed. And if the 3-speed was on the column, it was called 3 on the tree. So it would shift like that. Typical H pattern. So. Now here's some of the pictures that I took. Back in the 60s, I got my first movie camera. So I went downtown and I took home movies of different cars going through town. And here's some of the people. And I'll only use first names. I won't embarrass people out there if they're watching. But this was Doug, and he was driving his mid-60s Corvette. And you can see it was right in front of the Benjamin Franklin Savings Bank. Here we have Ricky driving his mid-50s Corvette. I actually got to drive this car. Oh, wow.
That must have been fun.
Yeah, had a 283 engine and a 4-speed. But what he did, they put 456 rear end, 456 gear ratio. And well, the thing used to have some really good hole shots. Wow, great car to drive. This is Jack in his mid-60s Marlin. That was a nice car. This was Wayne. He had a 1964 Falcon. That was a nice car. This car is a Corvette. It belonged to a guy from California. The story that I heard was that he had come out from California. Either he was working on Route 495, was being built at that time, or his father did. But either way, that car came out from California. It was really customized. It had a little small steering wheel. The bodywork was really customized. He had just left. He was just leaving Quality Auto Parts, which was where the black box is today. And so I got that. And you can see the old A&P store. It's since been demolished. And then George had a 1961 Chrysler, and what he did, he souped it up. That's another expression we used to use when you took an engine and you turned it into a high-performance engine. What he did was he put 2 4-barrels on it, 2 4-barrel carburetors. They call that dual quads. And the car really went after that. It was great. And then that was him in the rear of his car. So. And then we had Pete, had a 1968 Camaro. The reason I know that's not a 67 is because the 67s didn't have the side marker lights on. That happened in 1968. But that was Pete in his 68 Camaro convertible. And this was Bill's Roadrunner. It was the early 70s, either 70 or 71, I forget which. But that was him, that was his car. Bruce had a 1965 Ford Mustang, and that was a beautiful car. That was really nice. The interior was especially nice. I took some movies inside, and you can see the nice red dashboard and everything. And Bill also had a 1968 Camaro, and you can see the side marking lights. So that was a nice car. I got to drive that a few times, 4-speed, great. And then here he's leaving my house on Dean Avenue, heading towards town, and you can see
great view of Dean Avenue at that point in time too. Thunderbird
Cleaners. You can see College Pizza.
And this would have been 1969 or thereabouts.
This is 1968. 1968 because, or maybe even 69, because that was a 68 Camaro, and this is 1969. Yeah, guarantee it. Yeah. And this was Bobby's 1958 Ford. The engine in this car was a special engine. It was known as an interceptor, police interceptor, and some cars had that, and it was supposed to be really special. So, and then George also had a Roadrunner. This is when the Roadrunner first came out. It was the cartoon character. The horn here went beep beep, so it was really cool. We really enjoyed those. And this car was some guy named Joe owned this one.
Like that.
I wonder who that might have been. That was my first car.
Wow.
A
55, 56?
54 Oldsmobile. This was, it was a holiday in 98. I paid $75 for it in 1967.
Ooh, making me jealous here, Joe.
I know it, but that was the luxury model back in 1954. It had, and typically cars in those days, when you wanted to click your high beam and low beam, there was a little round button on the floor or your left foot. This car had 2 of those buttons. The button on the left was the high beam, low beam, but the button on the right changed the radio station. 1954 technology. It was
pretty
great.
Impressive.
Yeah, it was. And then there's the rear of the car. But then the car that replaced it was this car. This was a beautiful car. 1960 Ford Starliner. The convertible equivalent of this would be a Sunliner. But this Starliner was great. It had a 352 with a 4-barrel. It had 3 on the tree when I first got it, but then we cut this big hole in the floor and put a Hearst mystery shift in it. And so that was a great car, though. Yeah, it was the rear of it. It was really a sharp car.
These are great photos, by the way.
Oh, yeah. These are from my movies, by the way. Yeah. And then that car was replaced with the 63 Ford Falcon. We bought that at Bassett Ford. Bassett Ford eventually became Padalano Ford. Padalano Ford became Franklin Ford, and that's still in existence today. And that was a nice car. And then the guy that bought it actually took this. This is when this guy bought it from me. He put baby moons on it. He painted it, put a new top on it, and really did a nice job on it. So, but then I got this 1968 Chevy Impala, and it had a 327 with a 4-barrel and automatic. And this was a super sport version, and that was a nice car. I bought that from my older brother when he got married, and that was from the rear of it. And then in later years, my wife and I decided we wanted to look around for a convertible, and I saw one that was available, and lo and behold, we were able to get another 68 convertible.
In wonderful shape, too.
Well, the guy that did this car over was like, wow, it was great. So we enjoyed driving this for many years. So. Yeah. It's funny, this car, it might have been a 68 Chevy, but it had an automatic pilot.
Wow.
It was unbelievable. Every time we get into that car, it just drove to Franklin. I live in North Attleboro. This car just always seemed to aim toward Franklin every single time. It's amazing. I don't know why that happened, but it did.
It's so incredible to see the extent of car culture in the 60s in Franklin. It looks like a really exciting time to be
it was.
To be young and on the streets here.
Oh, absolutely. That was my high school years. Now, here's some typical pictures of downtown Franklin during that time. You can see Valley Jewelers was in that location. He's since moved down. And you can see a typical downtown, the parallel parking back then.
Suggestive of much less traffic than we have today.
Much less. And this is back before they turned it into the one-way, which they've since obviously brought it back to the two-way. Here you can see the Ray block with the clock and going down to Sully the barber and et cetera. And Freddie Lamberto was the police officer directing traffic at the time. Fico's shoe store was there at that time. And there's Freddie Lamberto directing traffic. And then looking the other direction, you can see there was an Eddie's restaurant there. And you can see Dean Jewelers was there. And then here are some pictures that I copied, movies from my home. I'm sorry, let's do that again. Wait a minute. And here are some more pictures from my home movies. I was driving down Route 140, going toward Rentham, toward Lola's Dairy, and I captured this. You can see Miller's Motors on the left. Leslie Miller owned that garage at that time. They used to call him Hockey Miller. So, and then going further down the road, Ken Miller, Leslie's brother, had Route 66, Phillips 66. The sign looks like a Route 66 sign. That's why I think Route 66. And you can see I'm looking down the hood of my 1960 Ford Starliner when I took this picture. And then here's a neat picture. I was looking down the hood of my 54 Oldsmobile, and that was a great car. So you can see we're going by Fico's Bolodrome at that time.
I can see the billboards that are still there now, or were there back in 68,
right.
69.
That's when Fico's was there. But after a hard day's work of riding around at night, we had to go to the Main Street Diner, downtown Franklin. This was right next to where Victor Pizzini's shoe store is. In fact, when they tore down the diner, Victor built a little addition to his store, so that's where that was located, in the alleyway right there. But the Main Street Diner was also commonly referred to as Joe's Diner, for obvious reasons. Joe Lazzarini owned it, and anyone that went to Joe Lazzarini's diner, if he was in a good mood, he would put on a show, be kicking his feet off the ceiling, throwing plates around, throwing change up on where the event was. Great place to go. Everybody that went to the diner knows that place, or remembers that place. Now, there was a lot of backyard mechanics back then. Cars were so simple to work on. Typically, we would change engines in the backyard. This was one example. Bill had a 58 Ford convertible. The body was really rotted and everything, but the engine was great. So we said, well, let's get a car that the body was good, but the engine was not good. And so he found a 59 Ford, I should say. So we pulled the engine out of that and we swapped engines right in the backyard.
It's so different today as we're recording this episode in 2020, where we're 20 years at least into cars having these very, very tightly packed engines where you literally have to take off the entire front of the car or take off wheels and all this stuff to do the smallest things, like add a new pump or add fluid to the radiator practically.
That's right.
I know from having being one of the few people that still does their own car work in their yard without the benefit of a car lift, how difficult that can be sometimes.
Absolutely. I mean, many times we'd climb slide under the car and work on them. And back in those days, the jack, if you want to change your car, the tire in your car was a bumper jack. You would literally attach it to the bumper of your car and jack it up. And you had to hope that bumper held. And it was tough going there, but Now getting our driver's license. First, back in those days, you get your learner's permit. And typically, we would take a course in high school to get your driver's ed certificate. And here's a copy of my driver's ed certificate. And the school actually had a dedicated driver's ed car. And there was one teacher that taught driver's ed back then. His name was Herman McCall. And he was from the South. He had a Southern accent. He was a really funny guy, though, a really nice guy. We would practice our driving skills. We would have to take 6 hours on the road, and then we would go up for our license. And typically, we took our driver's license test right in that car. And you had to do hand signals when you pull out from in front of the high school. And I actually got the wrong hand signal. I says, oops, and the guy said, go ahead, you can keep going. So, and you had to do a hill stop, where if you had a standard shift car, you had to practice the fact that when you were on a hill and you had your foot on the clutch and the brake, and you put in first gear. Now, how do you get your foot off the brake, put it on the gas pedal, and let the clutch out to start without rolling backwards? Well, what you would do is you would incorporate the emergency brake, and that would hold you so you could have your foot off the brake, and you would have to work the clutch such that as soon as you start to pull away, you let go of the emergency brake and you could pull away. You had to demonstrate that you could do that. Well, luckily this car had an automatic transmission, so our hill stop was easy. Just put it in drive and go. So we got off easy on that one.
It's interesting now because I think so many students at current day Franklin High School or Tri-County would be so envious of that situation because it's been years since the high school did driver's ed courses itself. It's now $700 at the minimum to do it with any of the private local driving schools.
That's right.
And
back in those days, my friend Bill told me that if you wanted to get your motorcycle license, get over to the registry. All they'll do is they'll stamp it for you, and you can get your motorcycle license. And I said, well, I don't really want to do that. I'm not interested in motorcycles. Then they changed the law. We had to take a road test for the motorcycles. Well, guess what? I got interested in motorcycles, so now I had to take the road test for the motorcycle, which I did, and I passed. So, but I could have gotten away from that by doing that. So, I didn't take his advice, but whatever. But I had to practice my driving skills in the driveway. So here I am in my mother's 1960 Impala, and then of course we had to practice our backing up skills too. So here we go. And then the big day came, and I got my license. And I got my pink slip. Now, back in those days, that's what you would get. You would get your pink slip. This is my actual pink slip. It was issued to me. And what they would do is about 2 or 3 weeks later in the mail, you would get your actual license. Now, I was still under 18, so I got a junior operator's license. And that's what that blue stripe stands for. And that meant that I could only drive between the hours of 1 and 5. I could not drive between the hours of 1 and 5 a.m. without a parent or a guardian next to me.
As I recall, I think it's actually similar today, although obviously today's licenses have gotten substantially more sophisticated looking. The age of Real ID and all that stuff with all sorts of watermarks and little printed things on them to prevent counterfeiting.
That's right.
So
this is
just to compare.
Yeah, that's right. This is just nothing more than a piece of paper. So, yeah. Now, getting gas at a gas station, nowadays we just take it for granted. We pull up, get out of the car, pump the gas ourselves, put the credit card in, but it was so different back in those days. Back in those days, you'd pull up to the gas pump, and you would run over a rubber hose on the ground, and the bell would ring in the garage. The attendant would come out, and he would say, "Okay, how much do you want?" And typically, he'd say, "Fill her up," because gas was cheap, about 25, 30 cents a gallon. and you would fill it up. And plus, you would also if you pulled into a gas station that gave you full service, not only would you get gas, now the guy would put the nozzle in the gas cap, into the gas tank, and then he would go around, he'd wash your windshield, he would he'd say, pop the hood. Oh, he wouldn't tell you to pop the hood. He could pop the hood himself because he could reach into the grill and pop the hood himself. He would check the water in your water in your batteries. The batteries used to have these little caps on the top. You check the water in the battery, you check the water in your radiator, check the oil, and he would even check the transmission, but if it was an automatic transmission, of course you had to have the car running for that. And then he would do that. And then he would also ask you, do you want regular gas, medium, or high test? Now back in those days, gas had lead. It was called tetraethyl lead. And they added that back in cars because what it did is it was an octane booster. And what it did is it allowed engines to have the compression to be raised significantly. But it was leaded gas and was polluting the environment, so they got away from that. So at some point, you could choose between leaded or unleaded gas. But the problem was cars were now being equipped with this thing called a catalytic converter. And if you put leaded gas in a car with a catalytic converter, it would foul the catalytic converter. So what they would do is they created the nozzle so that if your car had a catalytic converter, you could not put the nozzle into that because there was a very small opening on the gas on the tank. The nozzle was still kind of large. Eventually, when they got away from leaded and they put all leaded, all the gas nozzles were very small in diameter, and you could put them in there.
I find it interesting that, almost 50 years on from the ban on tetraethyl lead in gas, we still call it unleaded gas, even though you basically can't buy leaded gas, except for maybe a few things like for occasional aviation things, I think, where they need higher performance stuff. You may sort of be able to scoot around that, but it's kind of a funny relic in our language of calling it unleaded gas when you go to the gas station.
I think, now I'm not a real expert on the cars of the 50s that are around today, the antique cars that still had the old engines with the old heads. I think there was something to do with the heads, the valves. And I think there was something that said that the unleaded gas would hurt the valves. I could be wrong. I seem to remember something or hearing on something on that. The experts can, kind of correct me on it. But anyway, so that was that. And then now, typically you would pull in for gas, and usually the gas nozzle was behind the license plate. The license plate was mounted on this little flap. It was spring-loaded. But back in the 50s, the car designers got rather creative. They said, okay, let's really make their job difficult. Let's find a spot where we can put that gas cap where nobody will see it. And the best example that I can think of is the 58 Oldsmobile. The designers really got creative on this one. And anybody that knows the 58 Oldsmobiles will agree with me on that, where the gas nozzle was hidden underneath this fin. What you would do is you would put your hand where the arrow is pointing, and you would move it to the right, like in a clockwise manner. And that's where the gas cap was on there.
Well, this is the joke in the famous movie National Lampoon's Family Vacation from 1983, where they stop for gas somewhere on their awful family road trip, and the dad is just ripping parts off of his car, trying to find the gas cap. And he like yanks the tail off his car or whatever.
Yeah. Oh wow.
It's just to see, just how creative they got, in hiding these things.
Wow, that's funny. So, but that was probably the best example of hiding the gas cap. So. The other thing you would do is you would pay the attendant, and he would say, do you want green stamps? I said, oh, okay. And what you would do is you would have these little booklets that you would put your stamps in. And typically, I think it was where for every dollar you bought, I think you got either 10 green stamps. I think it was, I forget what the ratio was, but they would come in 1s, 10s, and 50s. Typically, what they would do is you would open up the book and you could either put 50 stamps on the page, or down the middle of the page, you could put 5 20 stamps like that. Or there was down in the lower right-hand corner, if you had a 50 stamp, you would put it there. So that's the way that would work. And typically, you would go to, there was a store down in Woonsocket, down at Park Square. It was an S&H Green Stamp Redemption Center, where, and you had a catalog. And what you would do is you would look in the catalog, and if you wanted a card table or something, how many books would it take? In fact, to this day, we still have a card table at home that we bought with S&H Green Stamps, and it was at that Park Square location. And we got that there. So, yep. Now here's a picture that this was taken from the Chilson films. Back in 1954, we had a big hurricane, and typically in a hurricane you lose the power, and what happens during the power failure, the gas pumps don't work. So they said, well, let's get creative. So what they did, they jacked up a car, and they hooked up a belt to the motor on the gas pump. And what they did, they put a belt on the rear of the car, and they ran the car, and that's how they got the gas out of the ground.
Ingenuity finds a way, right?
Unbelievable. So I got to thinking, well, gee, I better make sure that gas tank is full in the car, because if they run out of gas, and they better be pumping gas into that car to refill it, because then they're stuck.
They could be in trouble otherwise.
I know it. So those are a lot of my memories on downtown Franklin. Maybe you can share some of your memories of getting your driver's license. And
well, it's a lot less exciting these days, Joe.
A lot less exciting? Tell me about it.
Well, I think it's interesting now. I mean, I think millennials that are grouped as people born from the early 1980s up through roughly like about 2000, of which I guess I would be lumped as a member, are the first generation in about 2 or 3 generations that have had a decline in car purchasing,
really?
relative to past generations. At least that's a bit of consumer trivia I heard somewhere around. So it's interesting now. It's obviously very heavily regulated in terms of driving and things like that. Much less work you can do on your cars, but those that are of a mind to do it will still find a way. I'm lucky to know people that have done some creative stuff with home welding kits and all kinds of rigging out off-road vehicles and cars and that kind of thing for the modern road adventures that we have today. So
you talk about welding. That brings back a memory for me. When we were changing my =60 Ford Starliner over to the floor shift, there was a part that needed to be welded. So we knew a friend who knew how to weld. So we brought some of the pieces up to him to get those welded. So that was one little memory I had of having a friend that knew how to do welding. So, one of the other memories that I have of stopping at a gas station, nowadays we take for granted that we take out the credit card, slide it into the gas pump, and away you go. Well, back in those days, as I said before, the attendant would come out and pump the gas for you. The attendant had this big water cache, and typically the gas was so cheap that $5 would probably fill you up. In fact, not even 5. So if you gave him a 20, obviously he'd put the 20 on the back end of it and give you the change. The other term that we would use if my friend wanted to, he wanted me to give him a ride, he says, I'll give you $1 for gas. So, wow, $1 for gas. That'll give me about 4 or 5 gallons. That's great. So he really
we all wish it was still that way.
I know it, yeah. So $1 for gas really meant something. So.
Well, Joe, this has been an incredible look at the Franklin 500 and the awesome car culture our town had back in the 50s, 60s, early 70s, and a great look back at the cool gas stations we had and all the interesting stuff going on in our highways and byways back then.
Yep.
Until next time, I'm Eamon McCarthy-Earls.
And I'm Joe Landry.
Thanks for watching.
This program was made possible by your Franklin friends and neighbors, good folks just like you. Thanks for supporting Franklin TV. And thanks for watching.